This is now the time of transition, from ordinary time to sacred time. Time to check in with your body, to collect your attention, to be present in this moment. Let this moment be separated from yesterday and tomorrow. May this virtual space become a sanctuary for the next hour. Allow your screen to transform into a virtual community hall, to experience images, sounds, and music. Songs, poetry, and prose that will lift your heart, broaden your mind, and move you to do justice in the world, in the service of building beloved community. May this virtual service be holy time for each of us that joins us together in the celebration of life. Please join us in the chalice lighting words shown on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Next, we'll sing a unison song. The words will appear on the screen. The song is "We're Gonna Sit at the Welcome Table," traditional arrangement by M.A. Walden, song leaders Chris Jensen and Randy Rosette, piano Matt Edwards. This morning, we welcome to our pulpit Diane Cameron. Diane is a writer, a teacher, a columnist for the Albany Times Union. Diane is the author of 3 books, Looking for Signs, a collection of essays, Out of the Woods, about 12-step recovery, and Never Leave Your Dead, from a history of war trauma. Diane is passionate for people living in poverty and for family caregivers. She is the director of Unity House in Troy. Diane is also a spiritual director. She has worked with AUU Wellspring programs. She lives in Guilderland, New York, and Diane is married to David Pescon. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everyone. This is our invocation. May he who is Father in heaven to the Christians, Holy One to the Jews, Allah to the Muslims, Buddha to the Buddhists, Tao to the Chinese, Ahura Mazda to the Zoroastrians, Great Spirit to the native peoples, and Brahma to the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from disease and death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest himself to us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Hari Om, Shanti, 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 peace. Peace, peace be unto all. And our reading this morning. Once a wise woman was traveling in the mountains and found a precious stone in a stream. The next day she met another traveler who was hungry, and the wise woman opened her bag to share her food. The hungry traveler saw the stone in her bag and asked the woman to give it to him. She did so without hesitation. The traveler left rejoicing in his good fortune. He knew this stone was worth more than enough to give him security for a lifetime. But a few days later, he came back to return the stone to the wise woman. "I've been thinking," he said, "I know how valuable this stone is, but I give it back to you with the hope that you will give me something even more precious. Please give me what you have within you that enabled you to give me this stone." And as we enter a period of meditation, we consider this story. Once someone asked the Buddha, "Sir, what do you and your monks practice?" "We sit, we walk, and we eat, the Buddha replied. But sir, the questioner continued, everyone sits and walks and eats. Yes, the Buddha said, but when we sit, we know we are sitting. When we walk, we know we are walking. And when we eat, we know that we are eating. Most of the time, we are lost in the past or carried away by future concerns. When our mindfulness touches the present moment, we can see and listen deeply. And the fruits of that are always understanding, acceptance, love, and the desire to relieve suffering and to bring joy. When a beautiful child comes to us and smiles, we are completely there. So our talk this morning, addiction and spirituality, two themes that touch all of our lives. Addiction touches each of us through family or friends or community, and spirituality matters as we make sense of our lives, of our aging, and of our addictions. But Carl Jung, yes, he is part of the story, and it turns out that a central piece of that story began right here in Albany, New York. Here in Albany, we know the Thatcher family, 3 mayors, important businesses, and a beautiful park. This was an important political family. And as in any important political family, everyone is scrutinized. No one should embarrass the family or bring trouble to the family's name. But Albany's Thatcher family had trouble. And Trouble's name was Edwin, nickname Ebby. Ebby was that kid. Born in 1896, he was always in trouble. At home, with the neighbors, and at school. The only member of his extended family that was ever expelled from Albany Academy. As he got to be a teen, that trouble was fueled by alcohol. And when the important political seasons came around, the Thatcher family had to make sure that Ebby was out of town. So he was sent to Manchester, Vermont, where the family had a summer place. Ebby had friends there. It was a community of summer homes for wealthy, prominent families. 2 of Ebby's best friends in Manchester were Roland Hazard, who came from Rhode Island's most prominent family, their wealth from the textile industry, and his other friend was a local townie kid, William Wilson, or Bill, from nearby East Dorset, Vermont. Friends since childhood, Roland, Ebby, and Bill, all 3 troublemakers, all 3 bad drinkers. Always in trouble like his friend Ebby, Roland was in trouble with his family too. As a kid, the family could always bail him out of trouble, but after college, when he was expected to join the family business, kind of like Ebby, it didn't work. He was drunk every day. So, and because this was a very wealthy family, they sent Roland to every doctor and sanitarium in the United States, to no avail. After each treatment, he'd be dry for a few weeks or a few months, and then he'd be off the wagon and back in trouble. And his Albany friend, Ebby, was no help. He was always luring Roland back for more booze and more escapades. Finally, as a last attempt, before permanently committing Roland to an institution, the Hazard family sent him to Switzerland for treatment with the renowned Carl Jung. Roland spent months with Jung, where he received extensive psychoanalysis. His physical health improved, and it seemed like his mind had also. Jung declared Roland cured and sent him on his way home. But Roland got no further than London, when he drank again and stayed drunk for weeks. Broken and ashamed, Roland returned to Geneva and to Jung. Jung declared him a hopeless alcoholic. Depressed, Roland challenged Jung, asking, "Is there nothing I can do?" And Jung famously said, I have only ever seen a rare few of your type who were cured because they had a spiritual awakening. Roland said to Jung, no problem, I've got that. I go to church. I'm an elder. And Jung then explained he was not talking about following a religion, but this rare cure required spiritual disruption at depth. It was that interaction that enabled and touched the earliest part of AA, or to be more accurate, pre-AA. Roland left Geneva seeking this spiritual experience, and he found it in the Oxford Group in Europe. The Oxford Group was an evangelical Christian group. Roland joined up, he had a spiritual experience, and he made a commitment to the group and to helping others. He returned home to the family in Vermont on fire with his new beliefs, and he began to proselytize, carrying the message of Christianity and freedom from alcoholism, first to his old friend, Ebby Thatcher. When he got home, he found Ebby was in jail because he had been continuing his drinking and his trouble. And note the privilege here. Roland made a deal with the judge to supervise Ebby. And he said, if you will let me have him for 2 months and he doesn't dry up, you can throw away the key. The judge said yes. So Thatcher took Ebby through the 6 steps of the Oxford Group. And with Ebby's awakening, he too began to proselytize. So who could he help? What was the biggest drunk he knew? Of course, it was his childhood friend, Bill Wilson. And Ebby carried the message to Bill one cold night at a kitchen table in Brooklyn, and the rest is AA history. We know that those 6 Oxford Group steps became what we know as the 12 steps, and the program became what we know as AA. Today, there are millions of people who claim their lives were saved by that program and by all the grandchildren of AA, Al-Anon, NA, OA, GA, DA, Nar-Anon. There is pretty much a 12-step program for everyone. And there is even a 12-step program for people who talk too much. It's called On and On and On. Kidding. But there is a crucial takeaway. What Jung said was that the center of making such a deep change was that one needed to have spiritual disruption at depth. That spiritual disruption, what we call a spiritual awakening, literally shakes and disrupts the psyche so that integration, or Jung's word, individuation, can occur. Jung believed that when we shut down our spiritual instinct, we develop neuroses and anxiety. And then we use a substance or a behavior to fix that anxiety. So the 12 steps are not designed to stop drinking. Think about that. They are not a cure for alcoholism. What they do is create and support a spiritual awakening, and out of that awakening, we may stop using an addictive substance or behavior. This is also why the 12 steps can and do work for food or gambling or other addictions. It's the process, not the substance. James Hollis, a Jungian psychoanalyst and an expert on aging, wrote, quote, "We live in a culture that breeds addictions because we allow our deepest self to be severed from the mythic ground." Think Joseph Campbell. His point is that when we are dislocated from our deepest self, that's when we experience anxiety. And anxiety is a continuum that runs from an annoying discomfort to a very serious disorder. So let's pay a debt to the past. Here's what Carl Jung gave to recovery programs: surrender, the idea of breaking down that self-protective ego; projection, the idea that when we point one finger at someone else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at us; There are so many important concepts from Jung that show up in our recovery programs. But here's my favorite Jung quote. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Here's an example. A woman keeps dating men who are like her father. So she decides she'll quit dating for a while and focus on her career. So she gets a new job, and guess who her new boss behaves like? It just keeps coming until we change. Years later, after AA had been around for a while, Bill Wilson wrote to Jung, asking him about that early patient, Roland Hazard, and Jung replied, this is his quote, his craving for alcohol was the equivalent of a spiritual thirst for wholeness, expressed in the medieval language of a union with God. Now, it's important to note here that though AA and the 12 steps may be the best known or one of the famous routes to recovery, it is not the only route to recovery. There are other treatments and approaches that are also very effective. So you might be thinking, oh, that's so great for those people with alcohol and drug addictions, good for them, but not so quick. Here's the good news and the bad news. We are all addicts. We are all addicts. But maybe you're going to say, I don't even drink. I don't use drugs. I don't even like Advil. Well, Ann Wilson Shave, who is a scholar and an author on addictions, writes what she calls the process addictions: TV, internet, social media, shopping, even the nature shows, those very soothing, pretty nature shows, which we watch them because they calm us down. And the addictions are also on a continuum, watching TV to fatal opioid addiction. These are all anxiety management techniques to lower our psychic distress, hence Jung, hence Hollis. And Hollis says, whether we are conscious of the distress or not, ouch. Hollis says, in no one's life are these anxiety reductions pattern absent. In no one's life are these anxiety reduction patterns absent. Yep, that's the good news and the bad news. We all have anxiety and we are all addicts. So again, I hear you. You might say, sure, I have that bowl of ice cream every night, or I do my Sudoku every single morning. But is that really an addiction? Is that really relieving any anxiety? How do you know if you're addicted to it? There's only one way to find out. Stop doing it for 21 days. Does hearing that stir up anything? Teaspoon of anxiety? Hence, we all need some spirituality or some spiritual practices. So we go back to that early history of AA. We know that AA grew out of the Oxford group. And the Oxford group didn't plan to cure alcoholism. What they noticed was that the drunks, their word of that time, who were converted by the Oxford group, stopped drinking and stayed stopped. Now that we know what Jung meant by spiritual disruption at depth, we can see why that might have happened. But also this, in the first several years of AA, there was no literature, no books, no pamphlets, no checklists, what we are very familiar with today. Today, AA members read a big textbook called The Big Book, which is kind of a manual of instruction and a collection of success stories. Early AA members didn't have any of that. So what did they read? Well, they read the Bible, no surprise there, but they also read The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. And they didn't just skim this book, they studied it in group studies. They also read 3 or 4 of Jung's books, not light reading, no pamphlet there. And they studied Jung together. So it's no surprise that we find Jungian concepts in our AA and 12-step books and pamphlets and manuals, and in the things that were later written by Bill Wilson and AA members. But here's something else to think about these many years later. The 12-step program is actually a wisdom tradition. In theory, a wisdom tradition is a set of practices and ideas, a community of people that provide a framework for the development of one's inner self, the creation of a spiritual life, and the realization of enlightenment that stands the test of time. The 12-step program meets those tests. It has lineage, a community of practice, transmission, and it moves toward humility and service. Episcopal priest Keith Miller called the 12-step recovery the greatest spiritual movement of the 20th century. But here's one more way to look at AA and 12-step programs. This progress on this spiritual program can be measured by looking at 3 graves that mark the resting places of people who were important to the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. In the first years of recovery, the focus is on staying sober, of course. The focus is on me and my recovery. This is the time when we learn that, quote, it's a selfish program, and that my recovery is the most important thing in my life. Now, many members, especially here in the Northeast, have an opportunity sometime in those early years to visit Dorset, Vermont, and to see the Wilson House. This is Bill Wilson's boyhood home, and now kind of a museum and a meeting place. And also to visit his grave, which is nearby, just down the street in a cemetery. And it's kind of a pilgrimage for AAs to visit Bill's grave. In the small East Dorset cemetery, Bill's grave is very easy to find. And this is something that they joke about at the Wilson House, because people come from all over the country and all over the world, and they see the house and they see the kitchen where Bill's mother cooked and where he sat by the fireplace. And then they say, oh, I'd like to find his grave. How will I find that in the cemetery? What path should I get on? What road should I get on? And the people at the house say, just drive down the road, turn right into the cemetery. You'll find it. And when they do, and this was my experience too, barely as soon as you have turned into the cemetery in East Dorset, Vermont, over there to the right is the most decorated grave you will ever see. It has balloons and flowers and teddy bears, Post-it notes, letters laid on the grave, and lots of what we call chips, the little coins that say how many years of recovery someone has. And people stay there and they leave a word or a token of appreciation. But as the spiritual journey of recovery continues, a recovering person continues to grow, and they have to move on from not drinking to learning how to be with other people. These are the years when an AA learns how to be in a relationship, how to get along at work, how to make a friend, how to be a friend, how to own their part in a relationship. These are the years when people marry or remarry or repair or improve relationships with children. They make amends to their families, and so those family relationships can come back. In these years, one can actually or figuratively return to East Dorset to visit another important grave, and that is the grave of Lois Wilson, Bill's wife, and the founder/mother of Al-Anon, the 12-step program for family and friends of people in recovery. AA members who travel here realize that these are the years that they learn how to, quote, live and let live, Al-Anon's slogan, and how to detach with love. This is often harder than not taking a drink. Lois's grave reminds us that this is another level on the spiraling journey, and now it's not about me, It's about other people. And there's more. If one chooses to continue on the recovery journey, there is another significant crossroads that comes after years, say 15 or 20. While spiritual work has been going on all along, this next stage is about something much deeper. It is about surrender. And surrender is part of every faith tradition, going back as far as Krishna and Arjuna. A symbol for these years is yet another grave. But this grave is not in Vermont. It's right here in Albany, New York. Ebby Thatcher is buried in the Albany Rural Cemetery, and his grave marks this part of the journey. Ebby Thatcher was the man who carried the message of recovery to Bill Wilson's kitchen table. And while AA credits Bill and Dr. Bob with the first moment of one drunk helping another, that is not wholly true. So why isn't Ebby credited as the founder or one of the founders of AA? Simply because Ebby did not remain consistently sober. Ebby moved in and out of sobriety, though always in recovery, for the next 30 years. His imperfection was too glaring to be held up as a model in a young organization. However, when we visit Ebby's grave here in Albany, we find not teddy bears or flowers, but weeds and brush, and a few coins. And this was my experience when I went to Albany Rural Cemetery. First, I had to remember I was looking for the Thatcher family plot, again, wealthy and prominent, and I had to remember that his real name was Edwin, and I found his headstone. And I did get on my knees to say thank you and started to brush away the weeds and the brush, and I saw the glint of a few coins. And when I turned them over, their numbers were 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. I believe that is because people with that amount of time on this journey appreciate that imperfection is required to live a long time on any spiritual path. Imperfection is required to live that long on any spiritual path. While Bill Wilson's years are about me and Lois's years are about other people, the Ebby years are about a higher power or something in this universe that is bigger than us. And that bigger can be beauty or science or nature or goodness. Ebby Thatcher was a broken, imperfect man who was well used by his higher power. He was the crucial step. Without Ebby, there would be no AA and no spiritual path to recovery for others to follow. So at this later stage of recovery, we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to be used by God or what's bigger for good? And here again, we find Carl Jung, who said, we don't solve our problems, we grow bigger than our problems. And it is spirituality that is the fuel and the ground of that change.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution via one of the options shown on this next slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or intent of your gift. We must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next time by visiting albanyuu.org.
And our prayer of affirmation. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to see eternal life. Amen.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. The benediction, I've chosen a poem called Each New Day by Peter Fredericks. Why is this blank page staring back at me, mocking like an affliction and fraught with dread? How can it hold such sway, this simple emptiness? Might it instead be a gift left on my doorstep overnight, waiting to be broken open with the dawn? A present, eager to emerge if only I had the sense to hold the paper over a candle flame, its lemon juice message appearing like magic, clear and true. Each new day is like this, pure air, devoid of density, but for the weight of our own invention. Birds do not worry the morning or fret the rising sun. They wait expectant until its rays kiss their downy necks. Then stretching, they turn to face the day and sing. Our thanks today to musicians Randy Rosette and Chris Jensen, Matt Edwards, Pastoral Care Associate with Sharon Babila, Service Associate Eric Von Hausen, Ushers Tammy Hathaway, Kathy Harris, Welcomer was Don Odell, Office Support is Tammy Hathaway, Patience Pichette, and Technical Support Chris Jensen and Sam Trumbore. Stay on after the service for informal fellowship and conversation in breakout rooms, or remain in the main room where Diane Cameron will be available for congregational response and reflection. Albany UU is hiring religious education program assistant. Do you have 10 hours a week for a fun paid opportunity to work with the religious education program? Email Elizabeth Valdez to find out more. We also need a backup Sunday custodian from 8 to 1 for a few Sundays after September 12th, and folks for other occasional paid gigs. Building host and dishwasher, contact Tammy